Anybody else on the line? Okay. Well, that's a good core crew to work with today. So welcome and thank you. I think everybody's got the agenda and hopefully been able to pull up online on Adobe as well. And so our agenda day really covers both some key updates. There's been a lot of work planning between Anna and GYMR about the strategic communication for the release of the index. And then also we have index updates from Anna. And then we want to elicit your all's feedback on some of the developing materials and the plans for those. So without further ado, I'll launch into GYMR. Unless, Anna, is there anything else that you want to touch base on before we hear an update and some plans from Jennifer and Jessica?
I think we'll let them roll, and then we'll talk about the other when we get to the index update.
Sounds great. Thanks so much. Let me turn it over to our GYMR colleagues.
Great. Hi, this is Jennifer Chu from GYMR. We're really excited to be part of this, and we've been working closely with Anna and with the subject matter team and with RWJS on developing a communication strategy and approach for the upcoming index. And what I'm going to walk through today are just some of the core buckets of activity we have planned and kind of a little bit of the rationale behind who we're trying to reach with those activities. And then I know later on in the agenda there's some time for us to get into the specifics of two specific pieces of the tactics we're recommending. So I'm going to start out with the first bucket, which is what we call our core messaging and content development. And these are just sort of foundational materials that we need to create to communicate about the index. And this includes the website, some messaging development around the index, a summary of what the scores are and what they mean, and then some of the more in-depth into how the methodology has evolved. So this is just sort of core communications ideas and materials that the subsequent tactics will be built off of. So the second bucket is what we call outreach to all of our stakeholders. That includes this group, it includes the state health departments, it includes all of the key partners involved in the formation of the index, and of course it includes the NAC. And some of these activities include the things that come with index production, like the states getting a look at their data in the month of February. For us in communications, a key piece of it is we're proposing the development of a communications toolkit to arm all of the states with the tools they need to talk about where their index scores are. And we'll go into this specifically in terms of some of the brainstorming and feedback we're looking from this call. And then we go into media, which is the tactic that we use to reach all of our audiences, all of our stakeholders, sort of inside and outside the bubble, as well as to the extent that the informed public needs to know about it, the informed public. We have come up with a two-pronged strategy in terms of media, both national outreach as well as local outreach, pushes at the local state level. And our media approach also includes some social media tactics that include authored blog posts and placements of them, as well as some infographic content development, and to the extent that it's appropriate, Twitter and LinkedIn outreach. We are also, as in years past, planning an in-person event, a briefing to kick off the index discussion and to announce it. Most likely this will be an event that it will be held in Washington, D.C. We're still in the planning stages in terms of exactly where we want to hold it. We've been in talks with Anna about what's worked in years past, what we might want to evolve this year, and coming up with the best speaker roster as well as the best guest list for that. And then beyond, I think what we want to continue to do is support Anna in a lot of the outreach work that she's done and this group has done in terms of engaging stakeholders, both public health and preparedness stakeholders, as well as other key stakeholders like business leaders, local governments, things like that, groups that are kind of a little bit outside the bubble, but are also key stakeholders and audiences for the index. So those are kind of the large buckets. There are very specific tactics within. We are slated to walk through this with the NAC this week on the NAC's biweekly meeting, so that we're going to be able to share this with them, but wanted to share it with you all first. Are there any questions?
Questions, reactions? How far, well, I guess we can get to the updates. I was wondering how much we've actually had a chance to do some of the beginning drafting materials, or if we're kind of at still the planning phase of what they might include.
In terms of we have just started to, in the last 2 weeks, started to draft the core messages. And so we are working on that piece first. And from that, we'll roll out the more specific content pieces. Things like the press release probably won't come until later in the month of February. The executive summary, those types of things will probably be evolving in the next month or so. There's a little bit of, we can come up with the messaging based on what we know now, and from what Anna has shared with us in our conversations with the Kentucky team as well as the foundation, we have a lot of info, but I think some of the specific messages will come out once the index scores are finalized.
Right. Do we anticipate, Anna, that some of the draft materials would be available, or the materials in final form will be available when the states are reviewing their scores? Or maybe I should let you do the index production update and kind of see how the two mesh subsequently.
The goal is that they will have, at the very least, the core messages and hopefully some of the additional materials when we hand off the preliminary PDFs for review in February. So the goal is to have as much of that in place as we can so that we can get some response and some active feedback and some, well, this is a piece we really need that we don't have from the states and the folks who are looking through those materials. And really one of the goals in GYMR being on this call and then them interacting with the NAC on Friday is for them to really hear from many of our stakeholders and the leadership about what some of those components should be, what kinds anything that might be problematic and revise and go back to the well. But we're hoping to have an active input over the next few weeks into the actual composition of that toolkit and into the content of the pieces from folks in terms of what are really the items that we really need to make sure that we're hitting hard and well.
Is there a process
that... And just to be clear, when Jennifer talked about the information that UK and RMJS have provided GYMR, I just wanted to let the group know that that includes the website exercises that we have engaged in as a work group, the qualitative feedback from those exercises. That has included a summary of all the feedback I received at the ASTO DPHP meeting, as well as the feedback we received at the ESF8 meeting. That includes the pilot, the qualitative feedback we received on the pilot U3 survey. So they have all those materials that are informing their message development process. Jennifer, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, just to reiterate that what Anna has shared with us is a lot of the work that this group has done and the user feedback and the additional information gathering that the Kentucky team has done. And so that's all, that helped inform for us what we wanted to bucket out in terms of our communications approach. And later on in the agenda, when we go into the toolkit, a lot of our initial ideas for what went into the toolkit came from the feedback we've heard and from Anna's reports from the field.
This may be a question for, well, let's go ahead and go back to that. Any other questions other people had? On to index production updates.
Hey, Kathy.
Yeah.
Paul Patrick. I just had one, and it's probably obvious. I know from the first index and the second that came out, as preparedness, directors, we were concerned that there would be some longevity to it, that it would be not just a flash in the night or pan or whatever you want to put it in. And so since now it's transitioned to the foundation and to the university and it's moving forward, I'm sure that in all of the release information that will be emphasized and also help everyone understand that we're in it for the long haul, that there will be a lot more, that this is not just going to be the only release, but it'll continue on. I think that's real important for the people out there as they get the product and know that it's going to continue.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Paul. That's absolutely right. And I think you'll have a lot of opportunities to emphasize that. One of the platforms that we will definitely be able to use to emphasize that is this year being able to implement the retrospective trending and provide some trending data for the last 3 years as opposed to a sort of a one-off standalone index. We're going to provide retrospective data alongside it to show improvements over time. So that's one platform we can definitely use to show that the index is here to stay, and I think that will also be key through the other messages. And I know Jennifer and Jessica are taking notes even as you speak.
Indeed.
Important piece. Any other key things as we thoughts or ideas? FAQs and key messages.
Sure thing. Thanks, Kathy. For the last couple of months, we have been working with the NAC. We've had calls every other week to iron out any remaining questions about the measurement, the measure content, or the methodological structure of the index. And we have a shell in place now and are plugging in the data and running the numbers even as we speak. And some of those calculations are going to take a few days, but we are on target to hand that over to subject matter at the end of the month for them to begin populating their the website. So that's good. We also are in the final stages of the Delphi process in terms of looking at the subdomain and domain weights. We had a robust response to the measure level assessments. We had a lot of convergence, and the NAC has elected with the Program Management Office and RWJF to move forward with the weighting. We are, I know Mike is collecting that last bit of domain and subdomain weighting, and so we are excited to be able to introduce that. Our biostatistician, or not our biostatistician, our statistician and our methodologists are putting that index together. We sent the shell, the data shell, to our colleagues at Subject Matter a couple of weeks ago and have had some nice conversation back and forth with them about what is and is not possible in terms of the website. And I'm sure Emily would be happy to share their thoughts on the website based on both that shell and the prior conversations we've had and shared with them about places for possible website improvements. And so we'll be spending, as I said, we'll be releasing static PDFs of the findings at the state level to the states in February, so they will have a review period to look at those, make sure that none of the numbers look wrong, and again, advise us if there are additional materials, informational support, visualization support, other kinds of issues that we might be able to help them with before the official release, the official release about a month later. So we are on track with all of that. It's an exciting time. It's an incredibly busy time, as you can imagine. We are very glad to be working alongside GYMR and Subject Matter, who are really doing the heavy lifting in terms of the implementation of the communication strategy and website redesign work. So many thanks to them. And I think that's pretty much where we stand right now. We do have a call, as Jennifer mentioned earlier, with the NAC this Friday to provide a discussion of the communication strategy and solicit their input in much the way we're soliciting the input of folks on this call on different areas. And I guess I'll leave it at that and be happy to answer any questions that folks have.
What kind of questions does that raise for folks?
Anna, did you want us to jump in at Subject Matter and kind of give a little walkthrough of some of the activities that we're doing here?
Or is that okay for us to go ahead and do that at this moment, Kathy? Is this a good
Sure.
place for that? Okay,
Yeah.
great. Thanks.
So I actually was able to pull Wyatt into this call, who's our head of interactive. So he's going to go through kind of the main buckets of updates that we're planning on making and to the website, including the index. I'm going to.
Thank you. Okay, so first of all, there are obviously baseline updates to the website that are independent of the feedback that was given in some of the interface enhancements we're going to be putting in. And those are the database enhancements with the new data, and then retrofitting the old data, and providing for an interface that allows for trending comparisons, and then making the site mobile friendly. So those are very discrete units of work, and I won't spend a lot of time on those. Those are kind of understood and the kind of the core of what we're doing. The other items that we're looking at for the website fall into 7 basic categories, and it's based largely on our evaluation of the site and the feedback provided to us. I'll go through these really quickly, but feel free to stop me if you have questions about what a particular category means, particular items of work that will fall underneath it. And we'll keep this at a high level for now, and we can go deeper if necessary. So first is scannability. We want to look at opportunities to make the site more scannable and easily digestible by a user. This is particularly important as we move into the mobile paradigm. We want to make sure that people aren't having to sit and scroll throughout the page and really do a lot of thinking to make sense of both the messaging and the data on the website. So as much as possible, we'll apply visualizations, infographics, and other constructs that really help people understand the intent and the messaging of the site without having to sit and really digest a lot. And then clearly they can choose to investigate further and spend more time in specific areas, but we want the top level engagement with the site to really be easily digestible. The second category is limiting the area of focus and eliminating unnecessary scrolling. We know that that's been an issue in the past. There are areas of the site that are very data heavy, so we need to be sure that the application of scrolling and a user journey that pushes people down the page is very judicious, and we're not asking people to do more work than necessary. And this plays into the scannability, but specifically focused on page length and making sure that we have only relevant content on any particular view. The third area we're looking at is introducing storytelling and narrative capacity to the site without wholesale changes to the site. We're not talking about restructuring everything and starting from scratch, but rather to add in the capacity to add relevant supporting content in very discrete ways. And our thinking currently is that we'd essentially add a blog functionality that could have content pulled in relevant areas in support, but without disrupting the page flow that is currently there, that you currently experience. 4, readability. This is pretty tactical, but we feel there are a lot of opportunities to make the actual experience easier on the human eye and easier to digest. This is contrast of typography on images, imagery itself. The iconography on certain areas of the site is not logical. You'll see a news and event item with an icon that doesn't fit, and if you filter to news, that particular item will disappear. So we want to make sure that if we choose to have icons on the site, that they are meaningful and consistent throughout so that people are able to build a mental model as they go throughout the site. Page length, again, comes into concern. We want to make sure that each view of the site is one cohesive element and it tells a story and lets the user where to go next, but they're not inundated with too much content to quickly digest and basically tune out and leave the site. And then some tweaking of the color palettes to make sure that, again, the site is highly legible and we're not fighting against the human eye in terms of getting the information, the messaging, and the data out. The fifth area is wayfinding. What this means is we want to improve a very simple and scannable way for a user to understand where they are throughout the site. Right now, we don't really provide breadcrumbs or any means of understanding where you've navigated to, and there are multiple ways to reach the same content, which inherently is a good thing as long as we let people know both where they're at and where they've been. The sixth element is prioritization. There's some content currently on the site and that we're expecting to get in collaboration with GMYR that is buried. There's content in the About section, news and events, that we believe has merit and could add to the experience higher up on in the page hierarchy, maybe even the home page. And so we're looking to surface those pieces of content so there's a more meaningful user journey and narrative, something for every audience group to attach to as soon as they enter the site and to have a meaningful exploration of the data that's presented. And the seventh piece we've touched on a bit in some other areas, but it's visualization. We want to look at opportunities to reduce, I guess what I would call the cognition of a user and provide very simple ways for a user to understand and evaluate the data that's being presented. In particular, on some of the state indices, we're showing numeric data right now, and you kind of have to look at that information and compare it to the national range and sit there and think about what it means for that particular state. So we're looking at simple visual ways that someone can just go down the page and understand, okay, performance is good here, maybe not so good here. That also is going to play into our approach to the map and how we address that. In particular, we know that maps can be problematic as a navigational construct for mobile, and it plays a fairly sizable role in exploring the data right now on the index. So we're looking at ways of visualizing that information and letting people explore it that may not be tied to a map. And that does it at a high level, and I'm happy to answer any questions and specifics that the team has.
Thank you, Wyatt.
Of course.
What questions or thoughts or ideas or reactions do folks have to those?
This is Mary. Can you explain just a little bit more about the storytelling narrative piece? Would maybe give an example that might be?
This is Anna, and if you don't mind, Wyatt, I'm going to jump in really quick here because this is something that RWJF, GYMR, subject matter, and we have all had a lot of discussion around the last few weeks. You know, sometimes when you have an index, the conversation is naturally driven to an accountability framing. And what we really want to do with the messaging around this next index is to shore up the improvement, the quality improvement opportunities that the index provides. And part of that is telling stories of how, well, there are two kinds of stories. The first is stories that help peers learn from each other. So just as an example, I was at the ESF 8 meeting in November, and for the southeastern region. And some of the folks from South Carolina were talking about the work they had done during the flood. And South Carolina had a particularly high incident management and information management score in the last version of the index. And as he described some of what happened, some of the work that they did to really keep the hospitals open in the face of a do not use water order, it occurred to me that the story he was telling really had lessons in it about why they scored highly on incident and information management and why that was important, and that that kind of a story provides opportunities for other health departments who maybe have some additional room for improvement in that area to hear about some real-world examples of where that plays out. And we're thinking about that just sort of across the board. So maybe State X didn't score particularly well on the overall, but maybe they are really a leader in community planning and engagement, and maybe they have a story to tell about a tornado that came through, an opportunity, a learning platform to hear about those examples. Another kind of story that I think we'd like to gather, and Paul, I believe, provided this story at the launch last year, is how states are using the index. What they see in the index that really helps in the day-to-day job of making a more prepared state. So those are really two kinds of buckets of stories we'll be looking for. And we're looking, I think, especially at that February period where the states are previewing their results and where we have the results in hand to start identifying some of those really exemplary stories. And it'll be a slow sort of process at first, obviously, because as Wyatt indicated, they're just starting to build in functionality into the website for this kind of storytelling, and some of it may occur in blogs, some of it may occur in links out to news stories, some of it may occur through video in the long run. But for right now, we're just looking at identifying those stories, and to really start doing that, we have to have the preliminary index results in hand. But we'll have that month of February bleeding over into March a little bit to start looking at those. And I would really appreciate it if those of you on the engagement communication work group have ideas that really tell the story of this or that action area or domain and why that was important in this response or in that exercise, that you would share those suggestions with us. That'll be really helpful to get this ball rolling. We'd love your thoughts on the concept as well.
Kathleen, you did some work in that area as well.
Yeah, so I have a lot of pretty strong ideas about about this. So one of the things, I have a lot of thoughts going on too at the same time. So one of the things I would encourage you to think about is how maybe to talk about lots of potential sources of the stories or how they might show up on the website. But I think that, at least from the experience that we had, I guess with, 5 years or something, or more than that, of doing the public health practices website, is that there's a great appreciation for kind of a standardization of the information. So, it's like thinking of it sort of as fields of information. Stories are useful in a lot of ways, I think, in terms of inspiration, illustration, but if you want them to be genuinely practical and useful, I think it's very helpful to have this sort of a set of specific fields of data that you want to try to collect. What we used on Public Health Practices Project was first sort of a description of what the problem was, or the issue that they were attempting to resolve, sort of the context of it, sort of a bigger context of it, and then to get a little bit more specific, so how it relates to their particular area, because every jurisdiction is going to be a little different, so this is, how you make sure that it's clear that how it applies to that group. And then what the specific results were, what the specific sort of story, I guess I wanted to use the word practice, so I'm just going to say that what the particular solution was
and as much, detail as you can get from that. And then I think this was probably the most useful sort of field of information, but was what made that particular solution possible. So it often came down to, funding, relationships that already existed. I'm assuming that with the index, there's going to be, part of what made it possible was having the index and having the index kind of show where that area for improvement was. But those are, I think, pretty important pieces to have. And then sort of the final piece of that was what we called the results. So we didn't call it the outcome because that is such a loaded word, and really we're just trying to, to show a practice or illustrate a practice. So we would just say what the results were. And, some of the results that were shared with us were fairly quantitative. Might say, a certain percentage of improvement of people, taking vaccines or, accepting vaccines, or it could be just very qualitative, like, better relationships between different agencies. So that would be my biggest sort of upfront suggestion is, that you think that through. What is the sort of criteria that you want to make sure you capture in each one of these? Because A, that's very useful to the people who are going to be looking at this information. But there's a second reason, which is you can examine these over time and say, as you look at this over time and you collect this information, you can say, wow, it's this funding source that seems to be a real key kind of lever in the ability to improve this particular score, this particular area. So that would be, one of the things that I would highly suggest. The other thing is that I think I would also suggest, and this may be covered later in your presentation, but that a couple of assumptions are, I don't think, at least for our experience, we couldn't expect a sort of voluntary contribution of these stories. There was some of that, but really the majority of information that we got, we had to go look for. We had to staff for that. We had to have people calling, to get this kind of information. So it always feels like it's going to be an easy collection process, and it just never is. The reality is it just never is. And even if people do submit these ideas or stories, they're not complete. So there's always more work to this than meets the eye. And then there's the whole issue of fact-checking, because even if you have a submission of the stories, you really have, somebody has to check the facts on that and make sure that, that it is in fact accurate. So I don't want to carry on for too long, because I have lots of thoughts on this, but, to make sure that people are actually using it or viewing this, it does require kind of an editorial calendar of getting this information out to people. So there's kind of a push aspect of it, and you can't just expect that they're going to come. Just because you build it, they're not going to necessarily come. Let's see, I had one other thought. I guess, well, maybe, okay, one other final thought on that is that if you can think this through in advance, one thing that would be so helpful, I think, for anybody who wants to use this, use the information and for quality control, is to be able to capture how one of these stories or practices or whatever has been adopted or adapted by another group or jurisdiction or something. So if there's a way to kind of build that in up front, that would be extremely helpful, because to try to figure that out after the fact is really hard. And what you're looking for, is that sort of the spread of that, peer-to-peer influence and help. So anyway, I could go on. I've got lots more, but I will stop there.
Those are really helpful, Kathleen. And actually, I'm thinking, as Anna laid out the two different types of stories, the core content, the listing of what those questions would be for each of those two types would be very different, but we're thinking through to be systematic about it. And I have to echo, I too have experienced the fact that it really does take going out and actively looking at and developing these. It's something that does take staff and time, and that needs to get built in up front.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both. Jennifer, would you like to speak to GYMR's capacity and the stepped rollout concept that we've got going on right now?
Sure. Specific to the stories, Anna, or in general?
Just generally, and then sort of talking a little bit about how the stories will be filtered through in terms of social media launches and the iterative sort of process.
Sure. So I'm representing a team of about 5 other folks here that are going to be working on the various aspects of the index, and of course we'll be working closely with subject matter as they tackle the website. So as I've referenced before, right now we are working on the core message development, the sort of foundation from which everything else will flow through. And in the month of February, we'll be working on a number of the pieces that we can do as we know the scores, things like the executive summary, the stakeholder toolkit. We're going to get started on the release, both for the states as well as the national release, as well as a whole variety of other materials and supporting any kind of social media content to the extent that we need to and we can. What we're trying to achieve is to get as much and as far as we can in the month of February while the states are looking at their scores so that we're positioned in the spring to have everything ready to go. In terms of the stories, I do want to thank Kathleen for that feedback. I think we do intend to kind of have a structure in terms of how we craft the narrative and also what we're looking for when we make a call for these stories. In terms of gathering them, I think we were hoping and relying a bit on both Anna's knowledge and this group's knowledge and relationships to kind of at least identify some of the potential spots that we can then, call and interview and uncover. We don't have a target number. I think we would be pleased if we can, I think at one point the group talked about 1 story for each domain for now. But the other piece of the stories in terms of how they're going to be used, I want to add that aside from giving states a chance to learn from and kind of see best practices from what others are doing, it is a way to help bring the index to life to those audiences that are not as close to it, who may have an interest in it. And so we're thinking folks like the business community or the non-health security, non-public health, non-emergency management community that may need a little more context and sort of real-life examples of why the index is important and what it means when it comes to decision making. So the stories will serve kind of a dual purpose in that sense.
A clarification question a little bit in terms of timeline. So if I understand and process, so if I understand right, somewhere at the end of February that there'd be a static result to be sent to a state. They wouldn't be pre-reviewing a website. Is that the case, Anna, or how would that work?
Not in February.
Okay.
In February, they'll get the data, the raw data outputs in terms of where their states have scored. At about the same time, subject matter is going to get those data to begin building the website. So obviously, subject matter has the shell, and they've begun working on some of those larger issues that Wyatt laid out earlier. So it's going to take them a few weeks to actually incorporate the data and make sure that everything is functioning correctly. Ideally, they'll have a few days to look at the website before the official release. We're still working out the finer points of that release timeline, and again, we have that call with the NAC on Friday, so I imagine that coming out of that we'll have more of a sense of whether that's going to be possible for the extent to which we're going to have a few days for folks to look at the website in advance. But we do want them to have the data, which is important, as early as possible so that they can raise questions if they see anything that looks wrong, if they see any information support that they're missing, if they see numbers that somehow look not like what they entered in a survey, that those kinds of quality control issues we want to get in as early as we can.
Let me open up to the group and some of our field practitioners and folks at ASTO to talk a little bit about how important is it for states to be able to actually look at the website and see that data put in context and how it's visualized and get a sense of the tools before it's released publicly. What role does that play? How important it is to have some time to do that or not? What's the role of using it to brief higher officials in advance? Those kinds of things. Let me open up that feedback for folks.
This is Mary McQueen. I think it is important for us to be able to see it on the website itself. I think that gives us a perspective that just getting a data sheet or a list doesn't really give us. And from experience working on this, I think that visual piece is a lot easier if we are needing to brief our staff or brief our administration. It's a little easier to talk to them about it that way. So I would hope that we'd be able to do something like that.
Thank you. Other folks, we certainly have that in our draft timeline. It's just working out the nuts and bolts of the final dates and seeing how big that window might be.
The other piece, depending on how long you have to preview the website itself and or the tools, is if there might be certain tools in the toolkit that are particularly important to get out to states, say, a couple of weeks in advance of the release, because I think, and folks on the ground give me the feedback if this is still the case or not, but people often find it very important to go and make an appointment and meet with their state health officer or their governor and walk through what's coming and what it's going to look like and what the information for their state is and what to expect and anticipate and do some planning in advance before it goes public. And so it might be that a executive summary and a slideshow briefing or something along those lines sent out a couple of weeks before release, even if you don't see the website that whole time period, could also be helpful. But I'll let folks in the field say whether that's true or not, or what some ways to deal with this situation would be.
I can tell you that one of the items that has been discussed for moving forward are state infographics. And that sort of ties in with Wayne's earlier discussion about being able to look at scannability and being able to look at a page and getting more of a snapshot of what the big picture is. And so those state infographics are one of the ways we're hoping to get at that. But again, I should be able to share more after this Friday's NAC call.
Any other questions, comments, thoughts, updates? Are you all targeting a release at this point? I know it sounds like it's flexible and changeable. Are you looking at mid-March, late March, early April?
The website, the data will be on the website by late March. There is discussion of the in-person event that might lead into the first week of April. But again, I'll be able to finalize that date with you after the NAC meeting on Friday. But the website release is planned for the end of March, and then the in-person meeting may be that next week.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I want to make sure we have time for getting some of the feedback that you need and want for moving forward. And so it's okay with folks. We'll transition over back to GYMR to think about the toolkit components.
Sure. I'm keeping an eye on the clock because it looks like we only have about 13 minutes left, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So what I think I'll do is I'm going to give an overview of what our ask is, and perhaps I'll work with Anna to follow up with an email to that everyone's not sort of trying to brainstorm in 10 minutes. So the two specific components that we're looking for some feedback are the toolkit for the states, specifically what the contents should be. So in our minds, we think that the toolkit includes the executive summary, a state-based infographic that shows the state index results and measures, a comprehensive Q&A that any question that we think they might get, messages for talking to their local media, their local policymakers, and partners about the index and the index score, and then a ready-to-go presentation / PowerPoint deck about the background methodology and sort of, what the state scores are, and allows each state to kind of tailor and add specific slides that they need. So those were kind of the 5 key content pieces that would be tailored and put together for each state. So one thing I would like this group to think about is there anything missing, you think, from these tools? Are there other specific tools that you think would be widely used or needed in terms of how states can use, what states can use to communicate the index results? Part 2 is that comprehensive Q&A piece. What we are looking for is sort of any question that anyone can think of or has been asked before or encounters a lot or hears a lot, or questions that you think may be tricky and would require some nuanced messaging to be able to answer well. We're also trying to put together a relatively exhaustive list of those types of questions so that we can craft the right answers and arm people with the messages they need.
Thank you. So tackling, just with a few minutes left, process here, with the Q&A and the FAQ, the kind of FAQ questions, what's the best process for doing that? I know there are several listed on the site currently that you might be pulling from and adapting, but I'm wondering if it would be helpful for folks to review those and perhaps, list questions they've gotten otherwise in real life, because those are the ones on the website, the ones we've gotten, but developing, but not necessarily the ones the states were hearing from their communities or from partners in the community. So I'm wondering if it would be helpful for them to review those frequently asked questions on the site and send you additional ones, or just highlight ones they thought were most important, or what would be most beneficial?
I think, we're going to be pulling sort of as long of a list as we can right now in terms of the questions, and we'll tackle the answers in short order. But I think probably what would be most helpful is for folks to send us questions that they've been asked or they feel are important, regardless of whether or not it's already up in the FAQ or it's something they've been asked once before. But if they think it's something that may come up, jot it down and send it to us. In terms of a very specific process on how to do that, so that I haven't quite worked that out with Anna, but perhaps we can talk about setting sort of a date by which we'd like these questions, and we'll identify someone on my team for all those questions to go through, and then I can craft an email to go out to the group so that everyone has that and has some time to think about it and send those questions back to us.
So for right now, just have people thinking about what questions might be top of mind to be included in that list, and then wait for something to come from Anna and you that kind of says, please send them in this format by this date.
Yes, and it's going to be easy. I mean, I think I would ask, I think email is fine, but I think so that we have it in the right hands, we'll identify someone on my team who's going to be receiving all of the emails so that it goes to one person and we can start to build that list.
Great. Then with the toolkit components and the listing of those, could you also just put those on send out with the email list of what those would be, so folks that are not on the call could see that, maybe a brief description of each of those things are, and then we could solicit feedback from there as to, are these the right tools, is anything else that we need to be considering, that kind of thing?
Yes, and perhaps we can just accomplish this in one email.
Right.
We can send out an email of the 5 pieces that we've come up with that we think belong in the toolkit, and ask for folks in terms of input on, are there other pieces that we're missing? Is there anything here that doesn't look like it belongs? And at the same time, for that Q&A piece, because we feel strongly that belongs in the toolkit, and I think everyone would agree, what are the additional questions they want to see answered?
Does that work for everybody in the field?
This is Anna. I'd also like to throw out the thought that if your specific constituency, so for example, I don't think Doug's on the call today, but Doug works with state policymakers, state legislators, and or someone working specifically in health care, or someone representing volunteer organizations like Kelly. If those folks can think of materials or information specific to their constituents that we might have missed, because this has largely been done, framed as largely a public health and healthcare piece. If there are other groups, other target audiences that might need specific tailored materials or specific tailored questions, that we had a base toolkit and we could supplement with information for legislators or information for volunteers or whatever that might look like. If you have specific questions for those constituencies, that would be incredibly helpful to hear those, because we all have our own sort of perspectives and tend to look down that barrel, and that's what we think about when we think about what are the important questions. We think about what are the questions that are important to me and the people I work with and the people I work for. But if we can get some of those non-traditional constituencies represented as well in terms of thinking about how we might tailor materials for those audiences, that would be really helpful as well.
Great. So it'll be important to work into the email as well, the guidance and instructions.
This is Kathleen. I just had one question about the components. It seemed to me that at one point, and I can't remember if we actually did this, we were thinking of some kind of a guide for how to use the index at some point, with various stakeholder groups or for various stakeholder groups. Kathy, did we actually do that, and was it just sort of a document that just gave a couple ideas? Can't remember.
Well, we developed a document that kind of had ideas about kind of questions you could pose to using the index, and what the kind of process people might use from different constituencies, like how would policymakers use it, how could communicators use it, how might planners use it, and those are actually end up being incorporated into the FAQs under use, as opposed to being a separate standalone document. They could be pulled out into something and modified into something more around using the index for different audiences. That certainly could be an option. The other thing that we talked about maybe developing but did not do were some sort of conversation starter launch ideas that might help in facilitating use of the index with different audiences. And those were an additional idea that was out there but didn't get actually fleshed out into an actual tool, but might be something to develop down the road.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that doesn't necessarily have to be with the toolkit that goes out for the launch, but it could be something on the list for future, I suppose.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Excellent. I know one of the things I heard from preparedness directors at a couple of different events in the fall and going into the early winter was that one size does not fit all in terms of how we're providing the information. That they feel, many of them feel very grounded in this index already, and they feel like a lot of the information we provide is essential to folks who aren't as grounded, and they really would like to see us finding ways of reaching those and making sure that those sectors, and making sure that they have sort of an introduction to the index, that there are constituencies like business, and if we're really a cross-sectoral index, that we need to make sure that the folks who may have never heard of the index before have a different set of jargon-free kinds of materials that they can really work through. So that's when I'm saying constituent-specific, that's kind of what I'm thinking about is those sorts of questions that really someone who is brand new to the index but works for in a disaster response private sector group might in some way engage with and backfill some of the stuff that is so obvious to the folks who have really been on board since the beginning. So those are things we really need to be thinking through to make sure that we have toolkits that are appropriate to the folks we're reaching. Absolutely. Thank you guys so much.
Let me ask one last kind of process question that might be helpful, and that is, it sounds like there's a ton that is underway and is going to be underway in the next month in terms of developing content and a lot of the technical changes to the website. And then as those evolve, and I thank you for asking for input of the content of those things to this group here, and that will be really helpful, the feedback people give. But as the actual products begin to evolve, it strikes me that it might be helpful to GYMR, UK, and subject matter to have a group to float the kind of products by, so that they can look at and say, okay, yep, this would speak to my constituency well, or you need to not use this lingo or jargon here, or here's the visualization on the website. How does this speak to you in the field? How would that fly in your community? Is there a time in the timeline as things are developed to utilize, or an opportunity for this group to provide you that kind of field user input, or at least review to give you some feedback before it goes live, or does that simply go through NAC and UK? What's best?
Sorry, I was just waiting for Jennifer to respond, but I would be happy to share some of those materials and get a lot of feedback from our group on some of those materials. I'm not sure which, we've got a lot to do in a short amount of time, so I'm not sure which GYMR would feel we're most critical to have that kind of feedback on, but we'll certainly work with Jennifer and her team to identify opportunities to get that kind of input from the group. That's what the Engagement and Communications Work Group was envisioned as, was to help provide us some valuable guidance on what works and what doesn't. And so, but to which of those pieces and which of those tools most would benefit from that kind of feedback, I think that GYMR will probably be, and subject matter will probably be the best judges of that, as they're the ones developing those materials.
Yeah, my guess is, from user standpoint in the field, that it would be the content of the tools and the visualization of the data on the website. I mean, it sounds like there's lots of great technical other components that are being done for the readability and the prioritization and the areas of focus and stuff, but I think, it hopefully would be helpful to have users that could be closest to your actual audience, target audience, to kind of give you a last review or some feedback or any tweaks that might be beneficial to both the visualization of the data and to the content of the materials. I think
right, and I think that's exactly right. I think what our vision is for the pieces that speak to a particular audience, we would want to get that feedback from this group so that we make sure that it speaks to the right constituents and it's applicable. And I think very much like this is the purpose of having us on this call today. When we talked to Anna last year, we had wanted to be on the December call before it was canceled because of the holidays, but it's to sort of start building this relationship. We want to share with you what we have planned and what we're working on, and continue this dialogue as we march forward.
Yeah, I think it will make for a smoother release, and clearly you all bring a wonderful content expert or wonderful expertise to the project, which is fantastic. And working in partnership, I think, can make a big difference as it goes forward into launch. Yield. Any reactions, thoughts otherwise?
This is Wyatt. Just kind of on that point, we're going to start out modeling user journeys based on the core audience groups and constituencies we are anticipating reaching. Obviously, there's a lot of content message development that's going to be ongoing throughout the period, kind of in parallel with the website work. So I think we're going to need to factor in touch points throughout, where we have our user experience team essentially update our user journeys, where we anticipate people engaging with the site based on how they fall against the audience groups, and evaluate really kind of on the fly the potential changes. We have a finite amount of time, and so there may be feedback and changes in content or insights we gain for making visualizations more meaningful that may come up kind of late in the game. And so, we'll basically plan a process where we can ingest that insight and have a plan for incorporating it into the build, but also understanding it really depends on where that feedback and insight comes within the development process. There may be some things that are folded in later in the game, but we'll map out how that collaboration works and how it works as a part of our process.
Yeah, and it may be that there are certain ones that we could fit into say, our February call, but it may be that there are other ones that we either need to do an interim call or just send out, can you take a look at this and send us some feedback on, and just have the work group kind of, anybody who can reply to those kinds of opportunities to do so.
Absolutely.
This is Kathleen. I was just wondering if I could just make a quick suggestion on that. I know for my purposes, when I've had to develop some kind of a product and I just run into an issue I cannot sort out on my own, that's when it's so helpful just to have a group to just check in with really quick and just make a decision and move on. And, if there's a way to function that way to help, I'm sure that there would be people who would be available to do that. So it's so much easier just to get that and then not have to sweat it, figure out if that's the way it works. So just a suggestion.
Great. Well, good. Well, thank you. Any final thoughts or ideas otherwise? So we will look for an email from you, Anna, with solicitation of our input on the additional input on the toolkit components and on the toolkit documents, so the FAQs and Q&A components of that kit. And then we will look for further guidance from you all in terms of how we can best support the as we go in development piece of reviewing content or visualization ideas and that kind of thing.
Sure, definitely.
Hey, this one last thing, this is Kathleen. I just want to make sure you guys got some feedback on. I think that those areas that Wyatt talked about were really, really good. They're just dead on from me, from my perspective at least.
Yeah, they are great to be doing. They are great to be doing, and I think it's just a matter of making sure that the content as it gets developed and the visualizations using all the expertise that you all are bringing to this resonate and fully with those who will be using it, and that's what this group can provide to you. Great.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. Thanks to GYMR and Subject Matter for being on the call, and as always, thanks to all of you who devote time every month to this work group. We can't thank you enough for your expertise and your input. And Jennifer and I will circle up, and we'll be getting you an email as soon as we can.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.